Picture this. It's the 17th century. The Dutch Republic, they're basically the richest nation on the entire planet. A new golden age of trade and wealth is dawning. But right in the middle of all this prosperity, something really strange starts to happen. An obsession takes hold. This fever for something new, something exotic, something beautiful. It's a craze that would create fortunes overnight and then destroy them just as fast, becoming a story people would tell for centuries to come. What if I told you that the ultimate symbol of wealth and status, the most valuable thing you could possibly own, wasn't a precious metal or some giant sparkling gem? Yup, a flower, specifically a tulip. And we're not talking about your average garden variety tulip here. We're talking about incredibly rare, spectacular varieties like this one, the Semper Augustus. Its flame-like petals were unlike anything anyone in Europe had ever laid eyes on. Okay, so let's get into it. How on earth does a plant, a flower, become the most sought-after object in the wealthiest country in the world? Well, it was basically a perfect storm. First off, tulips were exotic. They came all the way from the Ottoman Empire with these colors so intense they looked almost fake. In the newly rich Dutch Republic, owning them was the ultimate power move, a total status symbol. But the real kicker, the thing that made them truly priceless, was something called a break. It was actually a virus, though they didn't know it then, that infected the bulb and created these insane, beautiful, totally unpredictable flame patterns. This beautiful disease made each flower unique, impossible to replicate, and therefore worth a fortune. And this painting right here, it just perfectly captures the whole vibe of the era. The Dutch were swimming in new money from global trade, and man, they loved to show it off. We're talking grand houses, incredible art, and gardens filled with the most exotic plants money could buy. A rare tulip wasn't just a flower, it was a living jewel, a centerpiece for a culture totally obsessed with putting its new wealth on display. Okay, so this is where things get really wild. This is the point where the passion for flowers pivots into a full-blown financial mania. The flower itself almost disappears, and it becomes all about the money. So the trading literally left the fancy gardens of the rich and moved into the smoke-filled back rooms of taverns. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just wealthy merchants playing the game anymore. We're talking weavers, carpenters, regular artisans. Everyone heard stories about fortunes being made, and they wanted a piece of the action. This became an unregulated, high-stakes game that was open to absolutely everyone. And here's where they got really clever. They invented something called wind handle, which literally means winds trade. Why? Because nothing physical was ever exchanged. People were buying and selling paper contracts for tulips that were still in the ground. I mean, think of it like the world's first futures market, but it was born in a bar. You could buy a contract for a bulb that wouldn't even be dug up for months, hoping to sell that piece of paper for a profit before you ever had to actually pay for the bulb. So this is the crucial part. This entire massive market was running on one simple and really dangerous idea, the greater fool theory. The price you paid for a contract didn't matter. The bulb's actual real-world value, totally irrelevant. All that mattered was believing that someone else, a greater fool, would show up later and buy that same piece of paper from you for an even higher price. And this one simple theory, well, it lit a fire under the market that pushed prices into the realm of the completely absurd. We're about to see just how disconnected from reality this whole thing got. All right, so to really get how insane the prices were, you need some perspective. Back in the 1630s, a skilled artisan, a master craftsman, earned about 300 guilders for a whole year of hard work. Okay? Remember that number, 300 guilders. Got that 300 guilders number in your head? Good. Because by February 1637, at the absolute peak of the frenzy, a single rare tulip bulb sold for 5,200 guilders. That's not just more than our craftsman's salary, that's more than 17 years of his labor. It was over 5 times the cost of a beautiful house in Amsterdam for one bulb. And if that doesn't blow your mind, check this out. A famous pamphlet from the time laid out exactly what one bulb was worth in actual real stuff. Not just numbers on a page, but a physical hoard of goods. Oxen, pigs, wine, beer, 1,000 pounds of cheese, even a bed and a silver cup. Someone literally traded a small farm's worth of tangible assets for one single dormant flower bulb. You know, a market built on nothing but the hope of finding the next fool, it can't last forever. Sooner or later, the music has to stop. And when this party ended, it ended suddenly and with brutal finality. This is the exact moment it all came crashing down. Picture it, a routine auction in the town of Harlem. The auctioneer presents the bulbs. He calls for a bid, and for the first time in months, there's just silence. He lowers the price. Still, silence. And just like that, the spell was broken. In that one silent room, everyone realized at the exact same moment, the last fool had finally been found, and nobody wanted to be him. Absolute panic erupted. And this timeline, man, it shows you just how violent the crash really was. Look at that slow build, and then look at late 1636 and January 1637. The price goes vertical. And then, in February, it doesn't just dip, it completely collapses. A bulb that could have been sold for 3,000 guilders one month was worth maybe 50 a year later, if you could even find someone to buy it. So what happened next? Well, chaos. A storm of lawsuits and public humiliation. Artists like John Bruegel started painting these satires, showing the speculators as foolish monkeys, dressed in fancy clothes, literally urinating on the once precious flowers. The guys who were hailed as financial geniuses just weeks before were now figures of complete ridicule. Their fortunes, built on paper, had vanished into thin air. And that's the story, right? The story of mass insanity, a national bankruptcy, total economic ruin. But here's the thing. What if that story, the one we've all been told for almost 400 years, is mostly a myth? All right, let's break this down. The legend versus what modern historians have actually found in the archives. The legend says Tulip Mania was a national disaster that ruined the whole economy. The reality, the powerful Dutch economy barely even noticed. Mass bankruptcies across the country? Researchers have only ever found a single bankruptcy case that was even partially linked to the crash. A frenzy that gripped everyone? Turns out it was actually a pretty small, contained group of merchants and speculators. And that idea of people losing their homes? The courts mostly just threw the cases out, calling the contracts gambling debts. Most traders just walked away from the deal.
So, where did this epic tale of disaster even come from? Well, mostly from this one book, written by a Scottish journalist named Charles Mackay way back in 1841. That's 200 years after it all happened. And his main sources weren't boring old economic records. Nope. They were the satirical pamphlets and propaganda pieces written at the time specifically to mock the traders. The joke, literally, became accepted as history.
So, if it wasn't a huge economic crash, what was it? Why do we still talk about it? Well, the real shock wasn't financial at all. It was psychological. It was a deep crisis of value. For the very first time, an entire society was forced to confront this bizarre, terrifying idea that the price of something could have absolutely no connection to its intrinsic worth. It was a moment that just shattered their understanding of how money and markets were supposed to work. So in the end, while the classic, dramatic story of Tulip Mania might be an exaggeration, its legacy is incredibly real. It became the blueprint for every single bubble that came after it, a cautionary tale that echoes every time we see prices completely detached from reality. The story itself might be a myth, but it forces us to ask a question. Is our fear of the next bubble, the next time we all mistake price for value, just as powerful and just as real today?